Welcome back, and thank you so much for choosing Morning Live. So right now, we're going to take a look at some of the stories that led the headlines this week. The Democratic Alliance in Parliament, they've written to National Assembly Speaker Thandi Modise requesting the removal proceedings of Public Protector Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane be instituted already. And in other developments, we have the application for the permanent stay of prosecution from former President Jacob Zuma and French arms company Thales, and that's been unfolding at the Pietermaritzburg High Court this week. It's just some of the stories, and of course there are many others. But let's take stock with political analyst Prince Mashele, who is with me in studio. Thanks so much for coming through.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good morning to viewers at home.
So we saw this week, of course, yesterday, members of the National Council of Provinces, and the day before the National Assembly members being sworn in Parliament. So the DA already making sure that they get off to a marching start by putting these proceedings on the table, that they want the matter into the Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane attended to.
Well, it's very clear that the battle for the spotlight is already on. The DA wants to set the tone in order to send a message to South Africans that it will be leading from behind, especially after the dismal showing in the elections. But I think they are right to call for the removal of Mkhwebane. In fact, I think she's the worst public protector since 1994.
Why?
I mean, there are 2 court findings reversing her recommendations. That is embarrassing. It never happened under Thuli Madonsela. And in fact, if you look at the cases that we are talking about here, they are actually very serious. You know what it means? It means going into the future, we are going to have a less confident public protector. Each time she investigates something, whoever is being investigated is going to take this to court. So that office is already in tatters. Okay,
let's just put this into context. When you say this never happened under Thuli Madonsela, of course, wasn't the first public protector that we had. Are we saying that the public protector's office has never had any of their findings, their recommendations taken on review and set aside?
Well, if you think of Selby Batwa, the first public protector, you think of Lawrence Mushwana. They were never taken to court like this. Lawrence Mushwana, for example, was weak in terms of his projection of authority in that office, but he was never challenged like Mkhwebane. Mkhwebane, remember, went into that office under a cloud that is part of the state capture thing. And in fact, if you look at the cases that she took on early on, it was very clear that something was amiss. And now she has been taken to court on 2 occasions. Very serious findings were reversed by a court of law. Now, I just cannot imagine her going forward working as confidently as a public protector who has not been challenged by our courts.
So just to bottom line this particular discussion, she argues that these are 2 cases out of hundreds of cases that the Public Protector's Office has dealt with. Why should she be judged then on the basis of these 2?
They are major, they are high-profile cases. And she has been found wanting in major cases. I mean, the fact that there's a case about Ugogo Dlamini, for example, that is not high-profile and she has not been taken to court, doesn't mean that integrity is not at stake. The assumption that people are making is that if she were to be taken to court on each and every case that she has handled, probably she will be found wanting.
Right, let's move on from that to the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Former President Jacob Zuma and French arms company Thales, they are looking there to effect a permanent stay of prosecution in the arms deal saga, 15 years in the making. And they are arguing that justice will not be done because of one of the things is, of course, the long time in which this has taken to come to a head. And also Jacob Zuma's defense blaming the state for actually delaying these proceedings.
Well, lawyers are busy battling it out in court. It is up to the bench to decide. But as I understand it, it's purely a procedural matter. it's not actually substantive arguments that they are presenting, because the substance of the case is whether Jacob Zuma is guilty or not, and that has to be argued. So this application for a permanent stay by Jacob Zuma's defense is purely procedural. I actually don't.
But are they immaterial?
Well, the court will decide on that. But here is the thing. If you believe that you are not guilty, why don't you present your case to the court to prove that you're not guilty? Because the state says Jacob Zuma is guilty. For me, what is important, I want to listen to that side of, not the application for a permanent stay. I want to know whether Jacob Zuma is guilty or not, and that can be tested if the case proceeds.
Thales are making the argument that, their case should be independent of Jacob Zuma, and yet the two seems to be inextricably interwoven.
Well, these are legal technicalities. What we know is that what Thales is accused of is linked to what Jacob Zuma is accused of. What Shabir Sheikh was accused of, it's linked to what Jacob Zuma is accused of. So whether these two cases are presented separately, in my view, is not material.
Let's talk about the political interference that is alleged to have taken place and that has played into why it's taken so long for this case to come to finality. What's your take on that? Because Jacob Zuma's defense is going very hard on that particular argument.
It's neither here nor there. If political elements gang up to get you down, it does not mean that you haven't committed a crime. So there could be a coincidence here. Your political enemies plotting against you, but only to find that you too have committed a crime. So you need to separate the two. If there are political characters that are working against you, deal with them. But if you have committed crime, you must also answer for the crime. So what Jacob Zuma is trying to do, he's creating a political cloud to muddy legal waters. So what courts are supposed to do is to separate the two and say, fine, we hear and we can see that there are people who politically plotted against you, but you have committed a crime or not? That's the question.
And then looking at what's happening in the ANC and this link to Parliament as well, the swearing-in ceremony, then we see the Deputy President, Thandi Modise, asking for his swearing-in to be postponed. Now, there have been all sorts of developments beyond this now, because the reason that he gave was that he was going to deal with what he was cited for by the Integrity Commission of the ANC. And they essentially said that he had brought the party into disrepute. Now, what's your take on how this whole development is playing out? In the first place, there was an Integrity Commission before this Parliament. The Integrity Commission before never had teeth to bite. It looks like Cyril Ramaphosa wants to use the commission in order for him to deal with elements in the ANC. So this thing has got to do with the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa does not want to have Thandi Modise as his president. And he also does not want to have characters like Nomvula Mokonyana to be part of his governance arrangement. That is the core of it. Now, there are a few problems. The Integrity Commission relies on the discipline of the cadres of the movement, because it is not, one, it's not a court of law, two, it's not a disciplinary hearing. So its findings are legally questionable and they can be challenged before the court of law. What happens if, for example, Thandi Modise were to take the findings of the commission to court and they are reversed? That would be a problem. But the problem arises even before that, because Thandi Modise is asking the Integrity Commission to give him the evidence that they have against him. So, evidence?
Well, that's the thing, by the way. The Integrity Commission, if you remove the fancy name, comes across as a kangaroo court, because a fair process, a person who is accused needs to be shown how a decision was arrived at. So if Thandi Modise can't be given the evidence, he would be within his right to suspect that there's an agenda against him and that the commission is being used against him.
So The other thing is, of course, the consistency upon which the Integrity Commission and the ANC, more broadly speaking, acts. If Thandi Modise, as the Deputy President, says, okay, you said as the Integrity Commission that we should step aside, we should not, assume certain office when we have these clouds over our heads, as cited by you as the Integrity Commission. And he's saying, I've done that. What if he tomorrow then says, why is everybody else who've been cited not doing that? Because there are at least 21 other people that have been cited by the Integrity Commission.
The question is, if the Integrity Commission says there's a cloud over you and you dispute that, what happens? That's the problem in the ANC, because it depends and relies solely on the discipline of the cadre. So if there is a cadre who feels that, yes, I am disciplined, but I don't believe what the Integrity Commission says, and therefore I'm proceeding to occupy a strategic position, what can the ANC do? Absolutely nothing. What has teeth according to the constitution of the ANC, is a disciplinary hearing. So if there's evidence, let it be presented before a DC, let a member be found guilty or not guilty. But the Integrity Commission simply throws a cloud, and the cloud must hang, and you must act on the basis of a hanging cloud, and you have no right really to prove yourself innocent.
So tomorrow we have the presidential inauguration. What's likely to happen then?
Well, we expect that the president is going to be inaugurated. We expect that after the inauguration is going to announce a cabinet. Now, we expect that when he announces a cabinet, at some point there must be a deputy president. Now, we don't know who's going to be a deputy president, but Thandi Modise logically expects that he's going to be deputy president by virtue of the fact that he's the deputy president of the ANC. So the inauguration will have a question mark. And this inauguration, it's actually for the first time that we have an inauguration taking place under such circumstances.
And of course, we're out of time, but I have to ask you about the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. And again, Transnet under the spotlight, and we're hearing all sorts of dubious deals that were done, people being paid, under questionable circumstances, ballooning of costs, etc. It's not a new story, but of course, it is being ventilated once again.
Well, what is clear so far from the Zondo Commission is that there are key state-owned companies that were milked under Jacob Zuma and all those who worked with him. Transnet was part of those targeted because there are billions involved there. Transnet buys trains, and in the process of buying trains, bribes are paid, senior officials have made lots of money, and processes were flouted. That's the essence of what is coming out. And it's the same story that came out from Eskom, for example.
And I suppose we'll hear more of that. Well, that's all we have time for with Prince Mashele this morning. And, of course, talking about some of the stories that made headlines this